Hey, it's Marley from the Energy Boutique, and I want to welcome you back to ASTRO CLASS. So last week, of course, we kind of deviated from the exploration of the patterns in our chart to explore where the eclipse was taking place and what the North Node in your chart would mean depending on the sign that it's in and the house that it's in, and what that overall mission looked like for your soul's evolution, your soul's potential, and of course, your life lessons, your life purpose. But the class previous to last week, we dove into taking a look at the patterns of the chart. And again, removing the fact of needing to know about the planets and the positions and the houses and the aspect and all of that fun stuff. We were just kind of simply looking at the layout of the planets, where they group together, what kind of chart it actually revealed. Of course, there's only 7 different charts. If you haven't listened to that whole rundown and explored your own chart, would definitely recommend you do that before diving into this one. But this week, we are going to explore the different hemispheres of your chart, what they mean, where the groupings of certain planets would indicate what it is that you are kind of here to either take from the world or create and leave to the world. So we're definitely going to just kind of, again, look at the bare basics, look at the main principle and the foundation of your chart, and just pluck out the indicators on what we can pull from that based off of where all of the planets are kind of distributed in your chart pattern. So what we're going to start off with here today is taking a look at all of the different hemispheres. So for this particular exercise, we're going to take the natural zodiac wheel. Again, we're using whole house sign placement just to make all the houses evenly distributed throughout the chart. Of course, looking at your own chart, it will not look as neat and tidy as the natural zodiac wheel does. Never, ever, ever will it. So you do have to use a little bit more discernment trying to kind of identify the boundaries and the groupings of different planets. But today we're going to look at hemispheres. So let's start by looking at the left hemisphere. So let's say, for instance, and this in no means does it mean that you don't have planets. Maybe you have a planet over here on the right side, let's say 3. And then let's say that you have the bulk of the planets kind of over here on the left side. We're talking about the left hemisphere of the chart. So this is, of course, referred to as the left hand or eastern hemisphere of the chart. And this represents the impact, if you will, that you or the individual that you're taking a look at, what this individual chart owner is going to leave on the world, the impact on the world. And so this is, again, where there is multiple groupings, where the most dominant cluster of planets are on the left side of this hemisphere. But basically it means that they can mold their reality into whatever circumstance that they want. They can leave their own mark on their environment, on their own life lessons, on their relationships. It is very much where the personality of this individual that, again, gets created here in the first house of self, where that identity is basically leaving a lasting, reverberating effect on the environment, on the people, on the relationships, on the action of the world. So this is definitely somebody who's going to make a major, major impact. When we take a look at the right side hemisphere, and let's say again that, you have planets, most of the dominant planets over here, in order to make it a dominant right-sided hemisphere chart, or western side, whichever you prefer. I actually like to go left and right because I find that eastern and western gets a little bit confusing, especially when we look at the top and lower half of the hemisphere. So I like to keep it just straight and simple with left versus right. But you're free to identify the labels in whichever way you feel comfortable. The right side of this chart over here is represented of the impact of the world on the person. So over here, because the identity is super strong, we're leaving a huge impact on everything that we kind of interact with, anything that we connect with. On the right side, it's almost like the world has more of an impact on us. So the external circumstances kind of shape and mold us into who it is that we are, and kind of leave their mark on us more so than anything else. So the circumstances of, relationships, we start relationships here with Libran energy. The relationships that we're in have more of an impact on us than we have on them if we have dominant right side hemisphere placements. It is also highly suggestive that if you do have a very strong right side hemisphere chart, that you're very influenced by your surroundings, by the people that you choose to spend time with, by the experiences that you have. They're very much impacting who it is that you are, shaping and molding. Now, in no way am I saying that, life doesn't impact left-hand individuals in any way, but I'm saying that there's more of an identity formed here when we have planets on the left side, so that we're not as easily influenced by outside stimulation, while the right hand side is definitely being shaped and molded by our exterior realms. Okay, so now we're going to get into top versus bottom part of the chart. And this is why I deviate from kind of using north, south, east, and west, because this is where things get a little bit confusing. The bottom part of the chart, okay, is actually the northern hemisphere of the chart. The top part of the chart is actually the south part of the chart. And that goes against everything that we know. We always think that north is top and south is bottom. Not the case, and mostly due to the horizon line, which is the AC and DC line, is essentially where the sun is rising. This is what gives you your rising sign, where the sun is rising at the time of your birth. And we are definitely going to confuse ourselves if we continue to use north-south. So this is why we're going to refer to this as top and bottom, okay? For my own sanity and for yours as well, it'll be much easier just to go top versus bottom. So let's just say that most of your placements are on the top hemisphere of the chart, and again, maybe just a few down at the bottom. Having a lot of energy at the top of your chart is definitely focusing in on your social life and on your public life. And we can tell a lot of that mainly because at the very top of the chart is the 10th house of career, of reputation. So definitely out in the public light, out in the limelight. We are more kind of hidden, I'm going to say, in the bottom part, just because this is our private life, where the home and the family are concerned. But we're talking about the top right now. So this is indicative that this particular chart placement, if you will, if you have many planets in the top half of this chart, we're going to be super focused on our career, on our professional life, on our education, 9th house, education. And we, in the 10th house, bring the education into our career. And then this is kind of the network, the connections that we make out of the relationships that we build through our education, through our career, and how we become an authority figure in our profession, in our industry. So if you have a lot of placements at the top hemisphere here, we are very focused on community, which again, 11th house is the collective, in our professional life, in education, in humanitarian efforts as well. And it is in the top part of the hemisphere, if you have a dominant chart in this area, that you actually look outside of yourself for approval, for validation. You get your approval and validation by the credit that you receive from your social group, from the public eye. So now we're going to take a look at the bottom hemisphere, which again is technically the northern hemisphere, which is just super confusing. So we're just going to leave that out altogether. The bottom part of your chart, let's say that we have all the placements down here, and again, you might have a few up here, but if you have the dominant placements in the bottom of the chart, this means that you are going to have a huge emphasis on your private life, on building your family, on building your identity, on perfecting how it is that you share space with other people. The Cancer energy of the 4th house rules over the home and family, very much the private life, while again, the 10th house that we just kind of talked about was career and reputation. So when we're kind of taking a look at the bottom part, the whole aim for us is to find a solid foundation in who it is that we are, build our own little home and family unit, and find a lot of the beautiful things, the smaller things, the pursuit of happiness, the small creature comforts, the pleasures in life through our home and family life, through our private life, through how we take care of ourselves, how we grow in our individual selves. And this doesn't mean in any way that you don't want to achieve greatness, that you don't want to have a great profession or any of that kind of stuff. It just means that the inner satisfaction of reaching our soul's mission and our soul's potential is more focused on the quiet life, the private life, where our identity, where our home, and we're perfecting our little family unit and the foundation of who we are, where that is the main goal and the main purpose. Okay, so we covered left versus right, top versus bottom. Now we're going to look at quadrants. Quadrants are definitely a thing. And not only are we taking a look at like your birth chart to see where in your chart the planets are most dominant, but we can also kind of examine where the topics and themes of the transiting planets, like the current astrology, would be more dominant in your chart based off of where they are clustered. And just an FYI, we have all of the planets pretty much clustered in this Taurus energy. Of course, there are some spread out in other signs here, but the majority right now in a whole system house would be in Taurus energy, in the 2nd house of building, of creating, of possessions, of worth. And so we would say that, you know, if we were looking at this as a chart, we would say that right now the bottom left quadrant is most active. So I just want you to understand that, of course, in these classes, we're trying to get you to understand your full self first and foremost before we start analyzing how the transiting astrology is impacting your chart. But I just wanted you to know that this is a wider spectrum of being able to identify where the bulk of the lessons are actually taking place. So we have to divide this, okay? So we're going to divide it in quadrants. Now, you will hear in other astrologers' vocabulary, they do it a little bit more technical than I do, because I find that the minute that you try to remember all the technical coordinates and stuff is the minute that people lose interest. So people would say that this is the 1st quarter, this is the 2nd quarter, this is the 3rd quarter, and this is the 4th quarter. I don't really get down like that. I say bottom left, bottom right, top left. In any of my sessions, you'll hear me speak those words and vocabulary because I find it's a lot easier. That's just the way that my brain works. Anywho, so the 1st quarter, or the bottom left quadrant, involves all of the very beginning stages of the houses and of the zodiac. So of course you have Aries, Taurus, and Gemini energy. This is essentially the building blocks of the identity. It is the spark, the fire, the flame of the soul and spirit. It is what we build, how we create, how we accumulate things because of this initial drive. And then here is when we actually bring it up into the mental plane and see where it is that we can do better. But if you have a lot of planets, let's say all the planets, and doesn't necessarily have to be all of them, let's just say, they're scattered that way, but the most dominant placements are here in this bottom left quadrant. This is going to mean that this person has a very, very strong personality. They are aggressive, they are assertive, they are self-motivated. They essentially, in their early days, in their early lives, will develop the characteristics that they will leave on the world later. So this is like developing oneself, developing the identity, developing how we assert ourselves, how we think, how we bring in information, and then how we take action in order to bring these particular topics and themes full circle. Let's say, for instance, that you had a dominant bottom right quadrant, or second quarter, if you will. And again, by no means do I mean that all the placements are there. But in this particular quadrant, we're going to see houses 4, 5, and 6, which is basically the fourth house is the minute that the identity has been created and realized that we want to share that and expand on that. That's why the fourth house is the home, the family environment. And then in the fifth house, that is our heart chakra, of course, is where playfulness and romance and children come out of what it is that we're building here, the foundation of sharing our lives with other people. It's also where a new level of creativity and expression. So we build the identity, we create a new foundation to operate, we start sharing it with other people. Now we want to get it off of our chest. We form something, we want to express it out to the world. In the sixth house is where we perfect those particular skills and where we put the identity to actual work. So if you have a lot of placements here in this quadrant, you're definitely going to be someone who is more focused on relationships or relationship oriented. You need companionship. You need somebody else to share that with in order to feel safe and secure and satisfied in life. So the early development in our beginning stages of life, there is an instinct for wanting to deal with people, wanting to share with people, wanting to bounce ideas off of people, wanting to build something with people, wanting to work with people. Again, sixth houses are work and service. And so we're really starting to build our identity, if you will, because this isn't the dominant quadrant in this particular person's chart. We're building the identity through the relationships that we're having with other people. So now we're going to take a look at the top right or third quadrant. So this is, of course, the seventh house of relationships. And one may ask, well, why, if we just came out of this relationship developing sector, did we not include it here? Well, because this is where Libran energy has one foot in the materialistic type of ego realm and the other foot where we start incorporating the soul. So all of these placements down here are very much building the egoic avatar. It is not until we perfect ourselves where we can start sharing ourselves, Libran energy, balancing ourselves with the world around us, with the people around us. So this is about a relationship to the soul, to the spirit in a different way. This is, yes, partnerships and marriage, but essentially how you share your energy with other people. The eighth house is the relationship within ourselves, the ego versus the soul and spirit, the light versus dark, the good versus bad, if you want to call it that way. And then the ninth house is our relationship to higher education, to our higher selves, to our intuition. And so it gets very interesting when we move into this quarter. Let's say that you have a lot of planetary placements here. And again, by no means am I leaving those particular areas out as well. But let's just say that this particular sector, this particular quadrant is more ambitious than maybe down here, because we have a different motivation. We see ourselves as a part of something greater in this, instead of just our ego identity and what it is that we're actually able to build ourselves. We have a huge need to cooperate with other people that aren't really family members, that aren't a product of what it is that we're creating through our biological family tree. This is like the outside world around us, where strangers come into place. And these types of people are very much looking to use themselves as a vessel in a way that would create a higher form, a higher impact than maybe some of the intentions on these two particular quadrants. So these are adaptable type of people. They're ever-changing kind of people. They really want diplomacy and fairness. And of course, that's because this Libran energy wants everything to be balanced. But we find that we're not balanced. Again, the Libran energy, we learn about balance through living through extremes. And when we find those extremes, we find light versus dark, or good versus bad. And this is where we attempt to merge them in the Scorpio energy. And when they are merged and we can operate as a wholeness, there's a whole different picture. There's a whole new truth. There's a whole new purpose that we can now align ourselves with, because we're operating as a whole instead of two fragmented pieces that, of course, the world would prefer that we stay in. So we're definitely more focused on relationships outside of, close friends and family members here. And a lot of the times, if you have a dominant chart in this way, it's these relationships, these connections that actually help to build success in one's career in this particular sector. And of course, we're going to talk about career right here. So it's basically everything that we're learning about ourselves through the relationship that we have with the world around us and the people around us. We accumulate that. Again, higher education hits off here in the Sag energy, where not only in informal classroom education, but like higher education as in like spiritual or religious or what have you, which is a whole different perspective in life. We amalgamate all these lessons, we bring it to life here in the 10th house, which we're going to talk about right now. Okay, so now we're moving into the top left quadrant, let's call it, or fourth quarter, whichever you prefer. And let's say that the dominant placements are in that quarter, in this quadrant right here. So this exists from the 10th house of career, of reputation, of karma, the 11th house of connections, network, community, of aspirations, of the big picture, visions and dreams, and of course, the 12th house of spirituality and undoing, when we basically bring everything together, we blur the boundaries, we mesh it into one, and then we kind of return to a state of wholeness before we individualize ourselves again, moving through into that Aries energy. So if you have a lot of placements in this particular quadrant of life, these are the most independent and let's call them ambitious people of all. Of course, a lot of that stems from the 10th house kind of kicking it off. But even more than that, this is essentially the metaphysical realm. It's when we step into seeing that there is more to life than just the egoic realm of material that we're kind of positioned to believe that that's it, right? We believe that these meat suits, once they die, that we're dead. Well, that's not true. We also believe that, there is only this physical life, this physical realm. Well, that's not true. We begin to see that in the Sag energy, but we really start learning these lessons in this particular quadrant because, again, Saturn rules here, Saturn rules there, and Neptune rules here. And those outer planets are very much about karma, and they're very much about beliefs and spirituality. So these particular people they make their own way in life. They stand away from the crowd. And a lot of that is because the Aquarian energy is alive and well here. Aquarian energy is about the collective, but about standing away from the crowd to be our individual selves. And we learn that through the polarization of the 11th and the 5th house. What we kind of need to focus on is that if you have a chart that is dominant in this quadrant, nothing's going to happen for you unless you make it happen. This is like this is the toughest quadrant because essentially you have to take the lessons that were learned in this quadrant, the lessons that were learned in this quadrant and in this quadrant, and you're putting it all together. You're bringing it to life. And one would say, okay, but my chart is only dominant in this. This is why we're looking at past lives. If you have a dominant 3rd quadrant, it is likely that in your last life, you were dominant in the 2nd quadrant in your last life. We take turns, we spiral. And so if you are a Capricorn or an Aquarius or a Pisces or have this dominant quadrant in your chart, this is like your test. Can you walk the walk and talk the talk? Because all your previous lives would have lent you the lessons of all the previous quadrants. And so it is very tough for people that have a dominant 4th quarter or dominant top left quadrant, if you will, because we have to depend on ourselves. Our success, our careers, everything is built off of our own motivation, our own efforts. And because we can only depend on ourselves, we have full responsibility and accountability, again, very much Saturn topics and themes, in order for us to be self-sufficient and successful. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, if you have a dominant quadrant in the 4th quarter, it's later in life that you actually reach these successes. Many people will struggle very early on in their life, in their development years. And it is a very, like Freedom 55, some people don't even hit success until they're 55 in this particular quadrant. Because it really is a tough love life lesson in being able to master and perfect all of the different life lessons that we would have learned in all of the different quadrants in previous incarnations. I want you to go ahead, take a look at your chart, and identify now, because you've already identified the pattern of your chart that you fit into. I want you to now identify where the bulk of your planetary placements are. So now we want to know, are you a left side? Are you a right side hemisphere dominant? Are you in upper hemisphere dominant, a lower hemisphere dominant? Now, of course, first, you're going to be able to identify the hemisphere, and then I want you to identify the quadrant. And I want to know, does it make sense to you? Does it align with your personality, with your challenges, with your life experience thus far? Any kind of questions that you have, I want you to drop it in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. Sending you nothing but love. Talk to you soon.